Welcome to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host, Mark.
I'm Billy.
I'm your co-host, Josh, and we have a super duper size episode today talking about this year's Fantasia Fest. It has been a few years since we've covered Fantasia Fest on this podcast. Typically, it's been me and Mark. This is Billy's first year, but I am very excited to talk about these movies.
Yay, movies. Sorry,
Well,
it's after work. It's been a long time, a long day.
Well, you and Billy are up first with The Beast Within. So hit us with a synopsis, and then you guys is what you thought about the movie.
You want to start it, Mark, or me?
You can take it. Let's see what you
All
got.
right. I'll try. Like I said, this is one of my first ones. This is I took it as a synopsis of a family's deep, dark secret through a little girl's eyes. It's not quite what you think it is. To me, I liked the movie. It had hints of different things as far as, I don't want to give anything away, but it's got a lot of mental health, a lot of things that affects people, and the beast may not be the beast you think of. I'll leave it at that.
It's a slow burn movie, and it suffers from a lot of the problems a lot of slow burn movies do, is that it just kind of drags, and there's not enough there to really keep you in it until like the last 15 minutes. And a lot of movies like that have it. And I feel like with the fact that if you see a trailer or a description or a movie poster, it's well known that it's a werewolf movie, but it's more of a, when you really get down to it, without giving the story away or anything, it's seems more like it's a metaphor for domestic violence.
Yeah.
So,
See, I wasn't trying to give it away, but yeah.
I ain't
exactly.
giving it away. Did I tell the story? No, I did not.
I feel like I just watched the movie and I didn't because Mark nailed it.
Fuck off. It was, I went into it expecting one thing from things I'd seen about the movie and come out of it saying something else. And I was actually kind of disappointed with it.
I liked it. Like you said, it was a slow burn, but I walked in expecting, like you said, one thing and completely seeing something else out of it. So,
all right. Well, what would you rate it for each of you guys?
2 out of 5.
Wow. That is really low for you.
wow. Okay. I was going to say like a 3.5.
It's fine. I have the next film. It's a short film called Berta, and this tells the story of a woman who gets revenge on her aggressor. So I consolidated because of how much movies we have. I have a lot of consolidation for what I think about each movie that I'm going to be covering. Independently, but this movie it's only 15 minutes. It has really impeccable pacing. Honestly, some of the best pacing I've seen this year at Fantasia Fest, and I found like it kept me on the edge of my seat pretty much the entire time. The acting is incredible. I think this film speaks remarkably to the mental health aspect of how revenge can have both a negative and positive impact on your mental health and kind of what that journey looks like. And I've really found that to be a really refreshing film that had some unexpected comedy in certain parts and just some unexpected twists and turns that really just vibed really well with me, and I'm going to go ahead and give this one a 4 out of 5.
You also kind of have a soft spot for shorts.
I do. I feel like short films don't get the due, and I think it's the first year we've done Fantasia Film Fest and have actually like talked about the shorts. We don't see a whole lot of shorts 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, and we did cover one of the same ones, which we'll talk about later on.
We will talk about it later, but Billy and I got to see a movie that actually opens up this Friday from Neon, and it is called Cuckoo. Billy, hit us with a description of this movie.
Teen girl and the family are invited to a resort where their things aren't what they seem. I actually, again, I really like this movie. I kind of got like a butterfly effect to it, like the old movie Butterfly Effect a little bit in the middle of it. Not necessarily 100%, but just the way it came across to me. But this movie isn't what I expected at all.
So
In a
I
good
will,
way.
yeah. So I'll say that I will say that I agree. I think the first two acts of this movie are something that kept me guessing, and I kind of felt like, unfortunately, it during the last act is kind of where a lot of this fell apart.
Yeah.
I really wanted to root for these characters, but it kind of seemed like the last like 20 minutes of this film, they didn't really know where to take these characters, or like they'd written themselves into a corner. And I think it's really saved largely by a lot of the performances in here. Um, it has a lot of heart and character development that kind of heals itself to kind of reset itself. I did really love the way this movie ends. It was unexpected for me, but I felt like the journey to get there as it transitioned from the second act into the third act up until the finale was really rough.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like you said, towards the beginning, it was great. Towards the end, it felt like they didn't know exactly how to end it or how to bring it all together to wrap it all up. But I still gave this movie a 3.
I'm gonna go slightly higher and go 3.5. I also think this movie's coming out of a trend in Hollywood that are following things like other horror properties like The Handmaid's Tale or Immaculate or The First Omen, that are really using their platforms to kind of talk about the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Kind of, I don't think it jumps into any spoilers, but it definitely, there are some of the whole like female reproductive kind of undertones to this one. And to me, I think there are better films out there that do kind of go after that argument.
No, I agree 100%.
All right. Well, next up, it's just me. It's just me.
Hey,
me,
you.
me.
I tried to get my hands on this one.
Yeah, I was going to put in for this one, but forgot.
I have to say that this next one is very clearly my MVP for this film, for this entire festival. This was my favorite film by far that we covered this year. This will go down as in my top 10 for this year. This movie is incredible. It's called Dark Match, and it tells the story of a struggling independent wrestling company that fights for their life against a small town cult. I want to be as very loosey-goosey as possible. But overall, this movie is the green room of all wrestling movies. Go check out our episode on Green Room. Not only is this movie incredibly fun, but it has some really awesome gags in this. I think it has, but it really walks this line between the campiness of like 90s and early 2000s wrestling, but with also having some like serious occultic horror vibes, but it never feels like it is parodying one of the other. It walks these lines very, very safely, and it takes a true master of storytelling to, I feel like, also be in the wake of just genre bending, and this one does it very well. This might be the highest score I give all episode and all year, but this one gets a 4.5 for me.
How did it compare to Out for Blood or Here for Blood or whatever it was?
It's better. It is better than Here for Blood. So if you guys get a chance to,
fantastic.
Dark Match is one that I highly recommend and will sing its praise for. I wasn't even done this movie yet, and there were two friends that I know would love this movie because they're huge wrestling fans. And I texted them and I said, I need you to put this movie on your radar. I'm not going to tell you anything about it, but just go watch this movie. It's absolutely insanely incredible.
Some wrestling fans.
So I'm also up next with another film. It's a Dirty Bad Wrong, and also I got to sit down with the director of this one, Erica Orfano. I mispronounced that name. I'm so sorry. But this one tells the story. This is a drama, so this is probably one of maybe two this year that I saw that were not in the horror realm. This movie tells this. It's a short film. It tells the story of a sex worker that attempts to make enough for her son's birthday party. And I got to say, this one was very surprising to me. We talked about this in the interview, but it really does humanize our antagonists in a way that I feel like most stories about sex workers do not. The direction of the storytelling and the narrative really hangs beautifully in the balance of this kind of wholesome and mysterious, but also yet disturbing storytelling. And the end kind of takes this hard left turn that I kind of would have loved to see explored, because it's just one of those movies that, like, it gives you a shock and then it goes to black. And I feel like there's still more story to tell here, but you guys can check out what Erica had to say about this film as well. In our interview, we'll provide a link in the show note below. But speaking of interviews, we also have one that Billy and I got to talk about, and this is a film called Faces. This is another short film.
Yeah, I didn't get to do the interview, but I did get to watch the movie, and it's about a shapeshifter that fights with their own identity. This is a beautiful film to me. It makes you look inside, makes you look at yourself and watch what the person or the shapeshifter's going through to deal with inner turmoil. And it's great paced. I wanted more, to be honest, when it left off.
So Blake Simon is the writer director on this one. You guys can check out the interview. We'll play it for you guys in just a few minutes. But I agree. I really enjoyed this film. He did a short film that I got to see last year called Red Velvet that was also very good. But this one, I feel like it's a really bold entry into the sci-fi genre. And it kind of has this like almost Lynchian feel to it. It's like there are moments in this movie that are just like hauntingly beautiful. Like, I don't know if there were sequences in this movie that you thought just were kind of creepy, but also kind of beautiful in the same way. That's kind of how I felt about some of the films, and it just has a way of just sticking with you.
Yeah, it was one of those, like, some of the scenes you want to look away, but you can't because they're just so drawing you in and things like that.
Yeah. What are you going to give this one?
4.
Yeah, same. So we're going to take a quick commercial break right now, but you guys can check out my interview right now with Blake Simon. We'll be back after this commercial break. If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us. I am now joined by the writer-director behind the short film Faces, which played at this year's Fantasia Fest. How are you, Blake Simon? How are you doing today, Simon? Blake?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So we were talking about this before we started recording, but your previous short film Red Velvet screened last year at Genre Blast, did its festival run. Now this year you're doing Faces, and Faces is visually, a lot of it looks the same, which I always love it when a director has like a very specific visual style. And kind of just starting with that can you kind of talk about crafting a visual style, carrying it from the previous work onto this one, and then hopefully beyond?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting talking point because, like you said, I think directors often have visual styles, and I'm no different. I'd like to think I have one, but at the same time, you're balancing your style versus what does the movie deserve to be, right? Like each movie should have its own identity to a certain extent, and so. Red Velvet to Faces is an interesting conversation because Red Velvet was the first time that the DP, Andy Franczak, and I had worked together. And it was a wonderful collaboration. Andy picked up some awards for the cinematography on Red Velvet, and I was very proud of what he did on that film. And so I knew going into Faces, you know, why fix what ain't broke? But so there was certainly a level of like, let's look at what worked so well on that film and figure out what works so we can recreate it. But also I wanted to go further. I wanted to take everything that Andy did so well on Red Velvet and push it farther. So Red Velvet's interesting because that film is ostensibly red, right? Like by design. Faces is a much colder film. You've got a lot more blue and just outside scenes that feel very different that would never be in Red Velvet. But it has the same sort of kind of almost pastel-y, like smudge over the movie. There's a softness that Andy and I did not want the movie to feel particularly modern and sharp in its look, and we wanted it to feel more of a throwback 80s classic horror.
I'm going to let you kind of give us a brief synopsis of this, because I don't know if what I would say would classify as a spoiler or not, or how little you would like this to know. So can you kind of give our audience just a microdose of like what this short film is actually about?
Of course. The film follows a group of young, college age students. And we follow them on the night of, there's a fraternity party, but there's also this supernatural element lurking and stalking them unbeknownst to them. And we get kind of an inside peek into something very unexpected along that journey.
Okay, I'm glad I didn't put my synopsis in there, because I definitely would have ventured into spoiler territory. Because
it's a hard movie to talk about, right? Especially when you talk about the performances, it gets very difficult.
Yeah, this movie is really interesting because I think it hits on a lot of things that kind of reminded me, like it takes like themes thematically from like I Saw the TV Glow and The Stylist, which are other horror films that have been released in the last 5 to 10 years. And it really kind of breaks down this conversation of just finding joy, or I would even say self-love within yourself, but it's told through this body horror lens. Can you kind of talk about crafting a story around these deeply profound themes, but also keeping it exciting by doing it through the lens of something like body horror?
Of course, absolutely. And just to quickly say, it's funny, the two films you mentioned, I saw the TV Glow, I love, but of course, Faces was done long before I even saw that film. And then the other one you mentioned, The Stylist, Jill's a friend of mine, so that's hilarious. The When it comes to the themes, and I think it's such a personal subject for everyone. Obviously, we're talking about identity and the search for identity in the film. And for me, it's something that is interesting to talk about because we live in a society that's so um, pro self expression and self exploration, as it should be. It's a really great, important thing that, for too long wasn't talked about so much. But the thing I wanted to explore was kind of this dark side of that coin, which is that search for many people until you get there can be really scary.
Yeah.
And the ways in which we choose to explore those sides of us, sometimes you don't get it right the first time. And, often when we see people exploring those things earlier in that journey, it can be scary the way that maybe they do something that's not really what they want to be doing or who they could be being. And you can sometimes see that on their face. I'm trying something out and everyone's applauding it, but really deep down, there's something darker going on. And that was something that I was even seeing in my own life and that some of the people around me. And it was that dark side of the search that I thought, that's really scary. It's not something anyone's really talking about. And I want to explore that.
We don't also see a lot of body horror nowadays. Like I think more recently I mean, you can argue that like we're seeing them through like, possession films and things along those lines. And I think, Cronenberg gave us Crimes of the Future a few years ago, which I think is, to me, it feels like the most recent body horror. But, when you're crafting a story around those body horror elements, how do you kind of pay homage to the greats of the past while also kind of forging your own impression on the genre for yourself?
That's a good question. I honestly don't know if I know the answer. I mean, I think we do our best, but I mean, because you bring up Cronenberg, I mean, David Cronenberg just lives rent free in my head at all times. And so I think often filmmakers, when we're doing anything, sure, there's plenty of times we're intentionally paying homage to what inspired us, but there's many times where we're doing it by accident or without even realizing we're doing it. So I'm such a huge Cronenberg fan. I'm such a huge Dead Ringers fan. The idea of multiples of characters appearing appearing the same but being different versions of themselves. I mean, it's actually something I think that's somewhat consistent throughout my work, and you've seen Red Velvet, so you can attest to that. But yeah, I like, there's nothing in particular in Faces that's like, I want to do this element from this Cronenberg or this whatever, but often it's the feeling, it's what can be done that's just uncomfortable and disturbing and different than we've seen. I mean, I think with body horror, you don't just want to repeat what's been done because it will lose its impact or just feel like a cheap knockoff of something. So the most body horror element or scene rather in Faces, I think, is really interesting because it's not particularly gory. I'm tiptoeing around spoilers, but it's extremely unsettling. And I think that's because it's not doing anything that we've seen in a specific scene I can point to in a previous film. It's just a combination of great performance, great sound design, and being careful not to show too much, because body horror is best when you tease something really disturbing and then let the audience even fill the rest in with their mind. I mean, all great scares, fall under that.
And that's the beautiful thing about Faces, is that there is this element of ambiguity to it, to where with some short films, they end up kind of feeling like a tease for a much larger platform. And with Faces, it's really interesting because the way that it ends feels like that story's gonna continue or has the potential to continue. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of like lore and mythology that can also be kind of fleshed out. So do we have a chance of actually seeing this as a feature, or does this just kind of want to stand alone as this short film?
Yeah, you're 100% correct. Yes, I am actively developing the Faces feature. It's going to be my first feature film. I'm very excited about it, and launching off the success of the short. And everyone seems to be such a fan of the short that it's been really inspiring, propelling us into the feature. Um, I think the reason the short feels the way it does to you is because so many proof of concept shorts for features are like just a scene, right? We're going to take a scene that was written for this larger story, try and execute it really well, and go, you want to see where it goes? Guess you better pay up. And you know what I mean? But that's always been something I've struggled with. I've written features before and I've made plenty of shorts, and they're always different. They're always discrete because I can't help but tell a story from beginning, middle to end. I don't like doing a scene. And that's why my shorts and features have not really been connected, because it's the short is its own narrative, the feature is its own narrative. The reason Faces works in the way you're describing is because it started as just a short. It has a beginning, middle, and end. And when I made the film, I was aware of exactly what you're talking about. I was aware there is, even though we have a beginning, middle, and end, there is such a larger world we've introduced, and it's clear that we're going to keep going, and I want to see where that goes. And so I think it's the reason the short works is because we didn't do it the way most proof of concepts do it. We did it backwards, which has helped with my own inspiration because I wanted to see where the story goes.
Yeah, I mean, I brought up the stylist earlier, and that started out as, very much the same exact way, where it started out as a short and gradually grew into a feature. And I think Faces has a really beautiful future ahead of it. I'm excited to kind of see where the characters go in the future and kind of how that world is fleshed out past this essentially one night party sequence that we're allotted into, because it feels like this film or this world has a beginning before we even meet these characters, and it feels like it has an end way past when we leave them.
Right. I agree. It does.
All right. Well, we're going to get back to our Fantasia Fest coverage right now. But before we leave, Blake, thank you. First off, thank you for your time.
It's my pleasure.
If you guys get a chance to check out Faces, but before we leave and return back to our studio time, where can people find you online?
Instagram is probably the easiest, at Blake Simon Film. That's probably the best place to connect. And you follow updates on myself and Faces. And, if you like something we've done, send a DM, say hello, and yeah, just keep in touch.
All right. Well, we're gonna get you guys back to the studio with Billy and Mark. We'll see you guys in a few minutes. Welcome back to Abyss Gazing, where we are continuing on our coverage of Fantasia Fest. And I feel like I have no life because I covered so many of these movies.
Other people have families. You have like a cat.
I have 2 cats and I'm married.
Whatever.
So there's that. But yeah, this next one is this next film is called Fish Out of Town. And this is the other one that I was talking about that is oddly, it's basically it's a more whimsical. It's probably the most wholesome film we're going to talk about today, but it tells the story of a young girl that befriends an otherworldly creature. And I put this on our curtain raiser as one of my most anticipated films because I absolutely love the director of this short film. If I can get it. Oh shoot. Oh, here it is. Sofia Garza Barbara, I absolutely adored her last film, Picadillo. I covered it last year for Genre Blast. It was one of my top 3 favorite short films, and this one kind of goes right in on par with that one. This one is a really beautifully vibrant and wonderfully whimsical short film. It thrives on its color palette, costume design, and honestly, I feel like I don't see enough films, or maybe I don't choose to watch enough films that are as wholesome and innocent as this film was. But this film was just very charming. 4 out of 5 for me.
It was whimsical.
It was whimsical. It was whimsical.
Whimsical.
It was whimsical. But something that may not be so whimsical is our next pick, Hellhole, which is one that you and I covered, Mark.
Yay. This is like the 3rd movie I have seen from this group in like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, they are. So this is the movie from the Addams Family. This tells the story of
the Addams Family.
That's their name.
Oh.
But basically, it sounds like it tells the premise of an isolated oil rig team that is pitted against one another when an uninvited guest or otherworldly creature shows up. If that sounds familiar, it's because we've covered a movie very similar to this one. What did you think about it?
It's basically Walmart brand The Thing.
That's what I was thinking.
So excuse me. It's got the same kind of feel the group's other movies have. I think one of them was Hellbender, and I forgot what the other one was from last year. But it's got that same kind of feel and tone, even though it's a different time period. It really is. It's fun in what it is, and it's cheese. It definitely. I'm not sure how to say it. It's not a bad movie, but it's entertaining. It has its fun moments, and it was enjoyable.
I feel like the word you're looking for is neutral, where you didn't love it, you didn't hate it, but it was something that you really enjoyed, because I felt that same way watching this movie. And I want to just slightly disagree with you. I think this is actually a departure from the last 2 movies that they've done. So they've done Hellbender and Where the Devil Roams.
Is it Where the Devil Roams?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
So the reason I say that is because when you look at both of those 2, they are more gothic in tone, and they are more musically driven. Whereas this film has no notes of music in it. It pretty much feels like you said, like a Walmart version or an independent version of The Thing. It hits those same story beats, and this feels like it's a very big departure from them, because when you look at the last 2 films that they've done, they had their daughter Zelda was like the leading driving force in that. She's not in this movie.
Yeah, I kept looking for her.
Mm-hmm. I think because you've seen that, you're expecting Zelda to show up, and I don't think that she would have made the movie better or for worse, but I think overall this film, to me, I liked how isolated it was. I thought they did claustrophobic really well, and I thought that I respected enough that they went and did something completely different than anything else that they've done. It doesn't always hit, but it, like you said, like it's entertaining and it works for the story it's trying to tell.
And they've got their over the course of 3 movies, they've really kind of gotten their groove together on what they're doing. So I think that's more of what I mean by the feel of the movie feels like the other 2, even though the other 2 are more supernatural in nature than this one is, where this one's more creature feature.
I will say also, just on that note, I loved the opening of this movie. One of the best openings that I've seen, and probably arguably my favorite opening from any film this year at Fantasia.
What, anal tentacles?
No, like just the fact that like it's like this like very silent thing, and then you have tentacles that just kind of pop out of nowhere. It's just like, okay, cool.
Yes.
Then you fast forward to modern day.
And that's something you never thought you'd hear in one of the podcasts, anal tentacles.
I mean, this isn't a hentai show, so
This is true. I mean, all in all, I'd probably go a 3.5 out of 5.
I'm also going to go 3, and I think that's fair because I think this movie does have a lot of entertainment value. It kind of drags, I think, feels like a little bit towards the end, whereas the first 2 acts have a much more finite pacing than the last act.
And that's been the consistent issue I've had with their movies is pacing. They all have that kind of drag to them in the pacing in all 3 of them.
Yeah,
they're not bad; they're entertaining, but they just have some pacing issues they need to figure out as a group.
Yeah. So, but next one is also sticking in hell and also sticking with Mark and I. This is a short film called Hell is a Teenage Girl. Mark, what do you got for us? What's this movie about?
Girl wants to get revenge on this town serial killer for essentially ruining her reputation.
That's
Am I
that's fair. No, you're not. You're not. Yeah. So, what did you think about this movie? I think 'cause we teased about it when we did the interview. But curious what you think about it.
They were very delightful people, by the way.
They were very delightful people. And you can check it out for yourself wherever you guys get podcasts from. We sat down with the writer-director Steven Salchuk and one of the producers whose name is escaping me right now.
Alicia
Rohr, something like that.
I'd have to look up her name, and I apologize to her in case she's watching or sees this, but I don't remember her full name. We know my track record with remembering names in general. So.
Yeah. Which I feel like I had a different experience watching this movie and then doing the interview with them. I felt like for the most part, a lot of this worked for me, but it didn't always land. Like I felt like the comedy didn't always like stick the way that I wanted it to. How was that for you?
I felt, like I said in the interview, I felt like it was part of the Leslie Vernon world, is really what it felt like to me. And it's a setup that they could either do a prequel to give you more to build on to the short, or they could take it directly off the ending and go in a completely different direction and turn it into a series of films, adding both. Overall, I liked it, and I'm not a huge fan of shorts simply because I feel like they leave too much stuff out or can rush things sometimes. And this felt like an introduction to the world and an introduction to characters that they could take in multiple directions for movies.
See, I don't necessarily mind shorts. I agree with you. I think that shorts sometimes feel a little bit more like either a trailer or a concept teaser to like a more long formed story. And this is definitely the feeling that you have coming out of here. I think the lore definitely hits really well. I think it's definitely a fun film overall. It reminds me of, I talked about this in the interview, it reminds me of Scream and more recently like Totally Killer. But I felt like it lacked the comedy I wanted. Whereas when you look at films like Scream or Leslie Vernon, as you've mentioned, the comedy works in those worlds. And one of those things that I would love to see kind of improve in future like long form stories would be the use of comedy and how that lands. The gags I thought were really well done. I just kind of wished the story felt a little bit more fleshed out. Maybe that's just because this is in and of itself a essentially they're going to do a feature of this as we talked about in the interview.
Yeah, I think they said they wanted to. It depended on how this kind of took off, but the idea was that they wanted to. It's not like. Did you ever see the original Lights Out short?
No.
Okay. Look it up. It's on YouTube. And it feels complete. And then when you see it turned into the full-length movie, the full length is kind of lacking, where the short felt complete. They told their story and what they needed to show, where it felt like they had to kind of stretch to make a movie. And the way this is put together and comes across, there's plenty here to build off of without having to do any stretching or figuring out for full length.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I talked about this last year with Smile when we covered it. Smile really worked as a short film. I thought that in concept, as a 10 to, I think it's like 8 minutes, like the short, it works really well. As a full-fledged 90-minute movie, I didn't feel like it worked. And
Smile, though, was just a retelling of It Follows. That's all it was.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Go check out our episode on with Artusia from last year, A Smile. But this movie, this as a short film, I think it works really well, and I think it's one of those things that a lot of the issues that I have could be fleshed out with a longer format. So I give it a 3.5. What did you give it?
I gave it a 4.
Last year, I'm adding this into while editing this episode. Originally, we were going to put the following interview as a standalone, and we decided to kind of supersize our Fantasia Fest coverage. So the interview you guys are getting ready to hear are actual two filmmakers, Stephen and Elise, writer, director, and producer of the film Hell is a Teenage Girl. We hope you guys enjoy this interview. How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today. We are joined by the writer, director, and producer of that, Steven Salchak, who is the writer, director, and Alicia Rotu.
Rotaro.
Rotaro. I'm sorry. I'm terrible at
I
names.
thought
I
you
apologize
farted for a
before we
second. I love how you were like, Rotu. Okay, it happens. It's a new one for me.
Well, hello. How are both of you doing today?
So good.
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 Yeah, thanks for having us. Yeah, it's like you said, it's in the kind of big festivals. It's easy for the kind of short films to kind of fall to the bottom of the pool and get overlooked. So appreciate you guys having us on.
Of course, I've had the pleasure of covering a few more festivals than Mark does, and that's one of the things that I notice a lot in like festival advertising, or not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's always one thing I'm always like, short films sometimes are like some of my favorite films that I end up seeing at festivals.
Well, you also do a lot of the reviewing for Horrific Hope to put together that lineup for that festival. So you get to see a lot more shorts than a lot of us.
I am the curator. Yes, thank you for that, Mark. We're talking about Hell is a Teenage Girl, which when we got the invite to check out the film, obviously for me, I don't know if it rang true for Mark. Jennifer's body kind of came to mind when it came to the title.
Yay.
Yeah, something somewhere along that lines. I read the description of the movie and it sounded like a pretty cool concept, But me being me didn't pay attention and realized it was a short until I started watching it and thought my link was defective, showing like a 20-minute movie.
Well, hey, it's funny you say that because we actually initially started with this being kind of a feature concept, and there were a lot of elements that, we couldn't include in the short, but we were like, getting funding for a feature film, and especially like one of our first kind of independent projects. I mean, as you guys know, with all the other filmmakers you talk to, it's hard. And in Canada, I think it's even harder than some of the US markets. So we put it together as a short and hoping that it can kind of act as like a little proof of concept, show what we can do with a couple $1,000. And we've got a full outline for a feature. So next time we send you a link, hopefully it's a feature. And then
well, it actually, the way it plays out, it feels more like a prequel or the jumping off point for a future IP. And it's just the way the story's told and set up with the way it ends. Or at least that's the way it came across to me.
Excellent.
Awesome. Love that.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of teasing aside. Can you guys kind of give us an elevator pitch for those that haven't been fortunate enough to check out the film? Maybe they get a chance to later in life, but tell us a little bit about what this movie's about.
Yeah, so it's essentially takes place in a small town called Springboro, and basically the town has a slasher problem where once a year, every year on Halloween, this masked serial killer comes out of hiding and targets teenagers who essentially break the rules of horror. So don't drink, don't do drugs, and don't have sex. And the main character in the story is a character named Parker, who's played by Skylar Radzian from Riverdale. And so she plays the slasher's estranged biological daughter. And so, she's basically kind of been on getting the short end of the stick with everyone in town, and everyone either hates her or is afraid of her for her lineage. And she decides to break all 3 rules to try to lure her dad and take him out and put an end to his reign of terror in town.
With the way this whole thing plays out, what do y'all want to happen with it? Do you want to do like a prequel with almost like a prequel with the dad showing the background? Are you hoping it goes forward with the way it ended? Or what kind of direction do y'all see it going after this if it catches on?
All of it.
Yes.
Well, dream big, swing hard.
Yes.
Yeah, there was a lot that we wanted to delve into with the short, and then at a certain point in time, it's like you kind of want to stay away from going closer to 20 minutes to get a short programmed. And we have the feature length outline where we do get to dive into some of the backstory with the dad and how this all came to be and how she kind of got outed as being the slasher's daughter. And then we have some really interesting kind of B and C stories with Parker and with her friends in the movie, so Riley and the mom Lori as well. So the feature that we've got written has a similar but different ending. And so that will just kind of give us the wiggle room and the playroom, I think, to tell the bigger, the story of the bigger world that exists in the short.
I think also what's beautiful about Steven's brain, like I've known him for a long time, and he's a horror cinephile, is I think what I love about his writing is that he's able to produce subject matters and storylines like that you just picked up on, Mark. Like you were just like, oh shit, like we can go left, right, up, down, wherever. So I think that's kind of the glory of this short, that it's already spinning wheels in people's brains. And that makes me excited because I'm like, oh, we're spinning a lot of wheels on our side. But it's nice that it's doing that already. So it's kind of exciting.
I'm kind of curious about the influence of this creation of the story because for those of you guys that are watching this, behind Steven, he has Ghostface behind him. Obviously, this pulls from the satirical roots of Scream. This kind of also gave me vibes of Totally Killer, which got released like a year or two ago on Prime. But even like the father-daughter dynamic kind of reminds me of the brother-sister dynamic from Halloween 2. So can you kind of talk about some of the influences that birthed this story?
Yeah, Scream was definitely the one that kind of like flipped the little light switch in, I think, my brain when kind of coming up with it. And it's kind of a funny story how this all came to be. So me and me and Alicia were in Atlanta for another short film that we did like back in like 2016, I think. And then after the festival, we decided to like we went to some random bar that was in like this weird underground cave. I don't know how we ended up there, and we didn't want to be there. But then as we're sitting there, and we're like, well, I guess we should finish our drink before we leave. And then it just kind of started spitballing, but it was kind of playing off of the initial kind of impact and like the influence of the rules that Scream acknowledged. And just prior to that festival, we had it premiere at Toronto After Dark just before a movie called Tragedy Girls that Tyler McIntyre directed. And we actually just had a call with him this morning.
He's amazing.
He's a great guy. And so that was also kind of the influence, because I think he and the writers did a really good job of kind of, walking that fine line of horror and comedy. And he just went balls to the wall with it too. And I think did such an amazing job with the casting, and the writing was sharp, and it was very, culturally relevant at the time too. So I think it was just kind of like a mishmash that kind of all happened at once, I guess. I don't know if that's a good answer or not, but it was like his movie was just like an influence and just like made an impact on us when we saw the premiere there after South by Southwest. And then, I guess ideas just kind of spur when you're in some sketchy Atlanta nightclub
dance cave. Yeah.
No.
With tequila.
I was actually leaning more towards Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, and wondering if that was an influence, because the way it plays out in the story behind it, every year the serial killer showed up, which is kind of how they came about with that movie, because they talked about Freddy and Jason and all of them being legends, and their shtick was coming back every year, and it felt like it could have been almost an extension of that universe.
What's that one called? Story Beyond the Mask.
Behind the Mask, the rise of
Leslie
Vernon.
Vernon. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I've never.
I haven't
watched
seen that one yet, but I'm gonna check it out now.
Can you text that to us? Because that's
I'll text
interesting.
it to you after.
Yeah, I got you. I'll drop it in the chat once we get done. But
Whoops.
that's a good
Way
pick,
to go,
Mark.
Mark.
Yeah.
It really does.
Put us in this awkward sea.
It really does feel like more of an extension of that universe.
Oh wow. Okay.
Oh, cool.
Thank you.
Well, you sold.
I mean, is that a good thing? Like,
yeah, is that a good thing?
Do you enjoy the
It's
film?
got a yeah, it's
okay.
it's a good slasher. The whole basis behind it, like I said, it's Leslie Vernon trying to make a name for himself, like Michael Myers and everybody did. That they were real people that created this shtick and got known for Michael Myers coming back every Halloween and doing his thing. Jason Voorhees coming back on the Friday the 13th, and doing his thing. So he's trying to start his legacy, so to speak, as a serial killer. And it really, the way it plays out, it's like a faux documentary, a mockumentary kind of is how it starts out. But it really wouldn't take much tweaking, and you could almost put it in that universe.
Noted.
But it does it's more of a I don't know if you'd call it an underground slasher, but it does have a fairly big following, and they've been requesting for a sequel for 10-15 years. People have wanted a sequel and they just can't get the funding for it.
Oh wow.
First off, they've made 2 sequels. One is done in comic book, and the other one screened last year at Terrific Hope. So
the short.
Wait for it. Yeah, because we had Dave on, remember?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we got to interview them.
Oh, sweet.
All
Yeah,
right.
I'd love to see this.
But we have Stephen and Alicia here from Ella's a Teenage Girl now. This happens a lot with me, Mark, going off on rabbit trail. So
the Scorpio
it's all
thing.
good. You gave us something to watch tonight. This is great.
Yeah, I'm gonna put my kid. I'm gonna put her to bed watching that with me.
Yeah. So I guess like you talked about originally about how this started out very large and then kind of eventually kind of came down to what we see it now. How many drafts or how many versions of this story actually existed before we arrive at the final one that's actually going to be at Fantasia this year?
Take it away, Steven. I can't remember.
A lot.
Yeah.
Probably like at least like
God.
Because we, oh God, so that was like 2017. And then we were getting ready. We wanted to shoot something back in, this is kind of fun,
2020.
in like retrospect. It was the end of February 2020.
Yeah.
And then that didn't happen. And then, after the pandemic, we all got, super busy just trying to get back to work and stuff like that and, pay the bills. And then we didn't actually get to filming this until like November 2022. So it's a long time between, I guess, like the beginning of 2018 and 22. So there were a lot of drafts.
Yeah. And drafts too, in terms of like little tweaks on the day. Like, I don't know if you want to count those, but it was like we had to recast, we had to like realign things, locations, all these things.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that the challenge that like we kind of faced too, like when I kept like spewing drafts at Alicia, was like the concept as a whole kind of like started really big, and then we had to kind of start paring things back and pulling out kind of some of the B stories and some of the character development too, because we're like, okay, we have to fit this in to under 20 minutes. And I think we landed right on the nose at 15 in the edit.
yeah.
And also just what we could actually like, afford to shoot, because me and Alicia just self-finance this, and
Yeah.
we called in a lot of favors and just had a lot of really good people come out for not a lot of money, or volunteering and stuff like that. So we just had to kind of work within like a 2.5 day shoot schedule basically.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the struggle. I think it was like the creative, it was like starts really big, and then we just had to kind of figure out how to make it happen with the resources we had and the time we had. And
And I think we were fortunate though that Stephen and I think, like to hold a really comfortable set and make it a creative, positive environment for everyone on board. And I think people know that. And when people signed on, it was as such, you know what I mean? So it wasn't a crapshoot. Um, hopefully not for them, because we were keeping it together. But yeah, it's I mean, God, even in the edit, it becomes a draft, doesn't it? You know what I mean?
Sure.
So like even down to that like last cut, you're like, oh shit, like this is what we have. So
yeah.
I mean, I've seen a few movies over the years that started as a short, like Lights Out was one.
Mm.
I believe.
yes.
Oh, from last year, the Possession movie with the hand.
Oh,
Oh, talk to me.
Talk to me started as a short, and I believe Skinamarink started as a short.
Yeah.
Um, it sounds like from what you were saying, y'all had a full script for this. So what's the process? I know with those, they have to flesh it out to make it a full length movie. What kind of process did you have to go through to cut it from a full length script down to a short?
Um, I don't know that I had like a process per se. I think it was more just like, I think that's probably why I ended up with so many drafts, is because it was almost like trial by fire, just kind of figuring it out, and then getting some like friends and family to read it and be like, well, wait a minute, what about like, what was that? And then you start to realize like it's hard to kind of pull yourself back from when you start with something like this, and then you're just like, oh right, I have to make this into a short because we don't have the money to make this into a feature yet. And so yeah, I don't know. Like, E, do you want to touch on that at all, or like?
I don't know. I mean, like I think just watching Steven's creative process and like being on each other's sides to get through it, we've always just had the feature in mind, if that makes sense. So for us to like
Mm,
dumb it down, and I say dumb it down, not in like because it's dumb, but like, to
like tighten it
dwindle
up.
it down into a short is, I don't know, like, dare I say easy? Because you're just like, oh, there's so much open ending. So like we can end it wherever to make it the feature. You know what I mean? Like kind of you were saying, Mark, you're like, you left this open, or we can go this way or that way. So I don't know. Maybe that's my perspective. It's like maybe completely opposite than yours, Stephen, because you're there literally like putting it out. But it's, yeah, I don't know. That's a good
Yeah.
question. But
I just think like at the end of the day too, it's like sometimes, and a lot of people are really successful with this, where they kind of like shoot a scene from a feature film, or like a 10 minute something
yeah,
as kind of a concept. And
yeah,
that definitely crossed my mind, because I know it's worked for a lot of people that I know. But at the same time, I was like, I almost felt like that, I don't know, that would do a disservice. I don't like, I guess I'm more like drawn towards being able to tell a complete story from beginning to end, and you got to kill a few babies along the way, and like, say that sort of thing, which sucks. Um,
No babies were harmed in the making of our movie.
No babies were harmed in the making of the movie. Yeah. I don't
Like,
know. I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's kind of just how it was.
I think I have like a
We'll
little
take
bit of
it.
a technical question. If you guys, so in movies like Candyman and Beetlejuice, obviously you say the names X
Okay.
amount of times. So how does the lore of this universe work, where the slasher always knows when the rules are being broken?
He's a peeping Tom, isn't he?
Maybe that's part of the
No,
movie that you're gonna have to
it's
watch when we make it.
it is part of the
No.
future where we get to really dive into the backstory and
Yeah.
dive into kind of that character specifically.
Love that,
That's fair.
Josh.
That's
You're in
Yeah.
our brain.
That's
You're in our
fair.
brains. Get the
Yeah.
fuck out. No, I'm just kidding.
Mhm.
That's awesome.
He's sitting in his lair, and all of a sudden,
Yeah.
teenagers are having fun.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
they
we've
never explained
actually
it in Friday the 13th, so
no, it's so
That's true.
it's you leave it to the imagination. But honestly, I love that you asked that because Steven and I have literally titillated on that topic many times, and we're still, yeah, we can't wait to make it.
Yeah, and I think with the short, what we just wanted to do is kind of just, have a bit of fun with like suspension of disbelief with it too, and just, in this kind of hyper alternate reality where this is something that can just happen without too much explanation and without kind of overcomplicating it for the audience. That was part of the fun of the short too, was you didn't have to introduce all those extra layers of kind of the logic behind it, whereas in the feature you have to. So
Yeah.
sure.
yeah.
Sorry,
Mark, I got
lost.
2 questions left. You got any more questions you want to ask?
Oh, go ahead.
I
Not
want to talk
because
about
I don't have questions. I just kind of went blank for a second.
I'm curious about the process for the mask, because I know that there are I've had filmmaker friends that have made slashers in the past also, and they've kind of talked about the process being that it's like they have this idea in their brain and then like it evolves in the process. So what was that process like for you guys, like creating the look of the slasher?
A process. Um, wow.
I'd imagine so, because
I
there's so many horror films with a masked character.
like let's
You
just talk
gotta,
logistics. Like first and
yeah.
foremost, like it has to be fucking original, or you have to buy it off someone that's gonna sell you the thing. You know what I mean? In
And then
terms
it's
of
like,
that
it does.
side.
Yeah, well, that was so Alicia introduced me to he's a guy based here in Vancouver, and he does a lot of big films and stuff like that. And it's Dallas Harvey, so he has his own company here in town and just does all kind of special effects and custom creations. So
He's so
we
talented.
went in, yeah, with sort of like a mock-up after Alicia and I had gone back and forth on it. And then because he's a pro, there were a lot of things from his side that he's just like, okay, well, yeah, you didn't think about this, or the mask actually staying
Yeah.
on the cool
Yeah.
design. But, and then going back and forth. And I think we probably drove him nuts, that poor guy, because
Yeah.
we just hadn't gone through that before. Like, when's the last time you designed a custom mask with somebody who actually knows what they're doing? And then you have, 2 people like us
That
who are
you
like,
can see out of while you kill people.
that's the other thing
Like, I
too.
don't know. So it
Yeah.
was
But
interesting.
he was like wonderful to work with, and we got
Yeah.
we got where we wanted with it. But it's just so much detail and artistry really goes into that, and it wasn't just Dallas. He had his team helping create that, and I thought he did an amazing job. And still watching the film, I think it just played really well, and it's a little bit ominous and a little bit blank at the same time. It has some like really nice texture to it and shape, which was really fun.
Yeah, because I remember we said we didn't want it to be like alien or like grotesque or like any like Chainsaw Massacre vibes. We wanted it to be still have like human elements, if that makes sense, like cheekbone kind of vibes, but like just little flavors of that.
Yeah, because that was also a big part of it that like we learned in that process too, was just the texture is so important, especially like when you're needing like you want the light to hit it and really shape the character too. So it's just not one of those flat spirit Halloween masks that you pull off the rack for $9. But yeah, it was a really cool process, and honestly, we couldn't have done it without like Dallas and his team. So
Yeah.
So did they have to use like the actor, like a mold of the actor's face to do the molding of the mask, or how did they do
It
that?
was, I think
yep,
I
we had
mean,
Dan go. Remember, Alicia?
yeah, it's like so sad. Yeah, we had no, well, he passed away. Our original
Oh,
killer passed away. He was big into the horror community, actor Dan Zachary. But he was our face man. He was kind of the guy. And then, of course, when you get it on a face, just like, a piece of clothing, you want to get it tailored, pinched in, tightened, all this kind of stuff. So we just kind of worked it around that. And then when we got our new actor in, Mar Anderson's, we padded it up kind of to his face. But yeah, it was built to fit a big face for a big man.
So I'm gonna ask you guys probably a question that you probably won't get a lot on this press junction for Fantasia, but what separates our publication apart from other ones is that we create content with the intent to talk about mental health and how that mental health teaches us about whatever type of art we're talking about. And I love that this is a slasher that intently also talks about legacy and specifically a tarnished legacy, and kind of the exploration of the character and really what drives her. Can you kind of talk about exploring some of those deeper themes and not just making this a one-note slasher, but really embracing depth?
Totally. It's actually, yeah, I like that you brought that up too. And it was one of those things where in one of the, many of the like 74 drafts that existed before the final one we got to, kind of when writing it, it was almost like there was the element of Parker kind of being outed as the slasher's daughter in one of the original concepts, and sort of like a bit of a metaphor for like the kind of coming out experience and everything that kind of happens after that. And unfortunately, there are a lot of not repercussions isn't the right word, but when you come out, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of, yeah. Or just like, everybody looks at you different. Not everybody, but people treat you a little bit different, look at you a little bit different. You might lose some friends, you might lose some family members, that sort of thing. And so we have that really kind of layered into the feature length version. But just when writing it, it was kind of one of those things that was always in the back of my head of like that sort of coming out experience. And there's a line in the movie where it's like, you can't pick your family, you're just born into one and there's nothing you can do about it. And I think the same can just be said about, any of those circumstances like that too. So I think we're both kind of looking forward to be able to dive into that a little bit more and a little bit more of kind of Parker's story and kind of the parallels between, hers and I think, my personal one, I guess, with, coming out and the fear around that and everything that kind of changes in your world after that.
It's gonna be you.
Yes, Mr. Hollywood.
I'm next to talk about a Hollywood 90028. This is a 1974 restoration film. It tells the story of a cameraman that is looking to escape the softcore porn industry to pursue jobs in the mainstream. I believe you could find this movie streaming on Tubi, but I'm just gonna say this was like I texted you guys and I felt like for so long I was like, I'm doing so good this year. Like I haven't come across any movies that I hated or any movies that are subpar the way that I have in other years, and this one broke my streak.
I thought I had a couple different movies in mind when you texted that, and this wasn't one of them.
This movie, I felt like had all of the makings because it feels like, so this cameraman is also a serial killer, but it never like leans into that. They try and leave into like he falls in love with like one of his co-stars, and it becomes this like character piece, and this guy trying to escape to also being a serial killer and struggling with that, like Patrick Bateman style. And then also like trying to like be this like love story. It really lacks focus in terms to be a cohesive story. And it fails on nearly every front you can imagine. This movie was a real chore to get through. 110%, but not the worst film that I've seen this year. That's still to come.
It's not the worst.
It is not. No, I got one that's a little bit worse for you. We'll talk about it in just a few minutes. But Mark, you are up with a little movie called Infinite Summer.
So Infinite Summer was a weird one. I'll give you the Fantasia breakdown. Summer takes a bizarre turn for Mia, Greta, and Sarah after a mindfulness app alters their body chemistry in a mind-bending new film by the maker of Jesus Shows You the Way to the Highway. So it is Estonian. Some of it goes back and forth between in scenes between subtitles and English. So some of the accents can be a little heavy and hard to understand. So subtitles are your friends. I'm trying to figure out how to describe this because it was weird. Which is what happens a lot. I get these movies that are weird that I don't know how to describe them.
I was going to say, you sound like you're struggling.
Yeah. Also, your definition of weird and my definition are not quite the same because you said that about another movie we're getting ready to talk about, and I'm just kind of just jumping in there. So
so the three friends go on vacation and they mess around with like augmented reality and dating apps. And the friends you just kind of hate because they're just really shitty people. Didn't really like them.
Yeah.
The main character was okay. The acting was okay. It's just my issue is there was no really characters that I really liked or had any investment in the overall story and the way everything played out. And it kind of felt like they had 2, maybe 3 different storylines that they were working with and didn't quite know how to piece them together properly. So it wasn't a very smooth story, a smooth flowing story. Like they all fit together, but it just felt like they were pieced together instead of written together, if that makes sense.
It does. And it's very frustrating when movies go after and do stuff like that in terms of their storytelling because it feels very distracting to you as the viewer.
Yeah, it goes from being like a friend's movie on vacation to Interpol gets involved at one point, like a police thriller or law enforcement kind of movie. And it just, parts of it didn't quite make sense. And to me, it just didn't seem like it flowed well from beginning to end. Even though everything kind of roughly fit together, it felt like it needed some revisions or editing to the script to make it all work better together.
Yes.
I like sci-fi. I like a lot of sci-fi, and this kind of falls in that category, but it just, I wish they had spent more time making sure the story was coherent instead of kind of pieced together like it was.
What is your Rorschach rating?
2.5 out of 5.
It's not
Right
like you
in the
hated
middle. I didn't hate it. It wasn't as coherent as it could have been.
So you saw potential.
Yeah.
It had the potential to be really cool, especially at one point, without ruining the movie. They talk about zoos and things like that. And when they start talking about it later in the movie, it almost seems like an afterthought that didn't quite fit. But if they had gone with it, it could have been like, dude, this could be really cool. But it wasn't quite as coherent as it could have been. And it was kind of off-putting at times.
So two things real quick. Define off-putting. And 2, I don't know if I gave my rating for Hollywood. It's a 1 out of 5.
You
Wow.
do.
It's a little distracting by off-putting. I mean, it's a little distracting when they kind of jump sequences here and there.
Mm.
It almost there's a couple spots where they go from the friends to the Interpol agents, and the way the transition's done, it almost feels like you're jumping to a different movie.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's a little off-putting. And that's what I mean by that.
Well, we're gonna keep the weird going here, because Mark defines this next movie as weird. I don't necessarily, and this is a sci-fi movie, so anyway, this is what I was referring to about us having different definitions. Then this next one is called Kryptic. Kryptic. It tells the story of a woman that has a strange encounter in the woods that sends her on an even stranger path. I got to sit down with the director of this movie, Courtney Roy. We'll provide a link in the show notes below. It's currently streaming on our YouTube page, youtube.com/victims and villains. This is the rare case. I think this is the only film we covered this year where all three of us got to see this movie. So, Billy, you've been quiet. What did you think about this movie?
I actually like this movie, even if it is weird in Mark's thing. I mean, it deals with a lot of stuff if you pay attention to it. It has kind of like the creature feature kind of Sasquatch feel to it, but it also has that sci-fi feel in the background of trying to deal with the Sasquatch. And I don't want to give too much away. Not sure if Mark gave too much earlier with the other movie we were talking about, but it does deal with trauma and abuse and things.
Mark, what do you think about this movie? This is the one I've been waiting to hear your thoughts on. So please enlighten me.
It had aspects that kind of reminded me of Memento.
I could see that.
I wasn't a big fan of Memento, and I like Christopher Nolan movies, but this had aspects of Memento, and I just wasn't my favorite of the bunch.
I am gonna side with Billy on this one.
Of course you are.
I honestly really loved this movie. I thought this movie was beautiful, and it really kind of toes this line between being creepy science fiction that gives us cryptic zoology that we don't see a whole lot of creature features about, so to kind of get something
I kind
in
of
that
felt
vein?
more like an invasion of the body snatchers than a cryptid kind of creature feature.
I can see that, but I mean, it did have scenes where it kind of showed a cryptic side to it. So,
Yes.
And they referenced it. So that's why I said
Yes.
cryptic.
Also, Courtney talks about it in the interview as well, kind of how they crafted this cryptic lore. So go check it out. But I also thought that this was, like Billy said, thought this was a very impressive, spectacular metaphor for trauma and how we kind of process it, and ultimately kind of, if we decide that we ultimately don't want to process it, we somehow end up back at the doorstep of said trauma. I thought the performance from Chloe P. Peary, I think how you say that name, was really good. I really loved the direction from Courtney Roy in this. I thought the visuals were very stunning, very kind of creepy, but also very enticing. I really enjoyed this movie. I know Mark doesn't really like it, but it's fine. 2 out of 3 of us liked it, so
Start with Mark's rating first.
It's not often we come across movies we could agree on very much, is it?
Get the bad news out of the way. What's your score for this movie?
Probably 2 out of 5.
You hated this movie more than Infinite Summer?
I felt like Infinite Summer had more potential.
Oh my God, man.
Anyway.
See,
Billy,
I'm the opposite. This
Billy,
is a
hit
movie
me
I
with the good
go
news.
back and rewatch this movie because I like this. This is a 4 to
Same.
me. It's a 4.
It's a very strong 4.
Yeah.
Very, very strong 4.
Whatever. You guys suck.
Look, I think this movie perfectly represents everything that this show was birthed out of. This intersection between horror and mental health, and this film does a spectacular job at doing both, implementing really creepy atmosphere, but also at the same time really showcasing the character journey of what it looks like to work through trauma. And that's really, at the end of the day, why I fell in love with this movie.
And I think this movie, after you watch it, you see the full storyline. If you go back and watch it in the other set of eyes of how it ended and things like that, you'll see it in a different aspect.
All right. Well, I'm about to hit you with the worst movie I saw this year. This movie's called Me and My Victim. Basically, this movie is so it tells the story of a couple that recounts how they met, and it's a very experimental documentary. This is one of those things that this is a film that I respect for how different it is and how out there it is. It's this big mix of poetry and mixed media artistry and podcasting and all of these other things. And it definitely has the visuals to boast a film that stands out. But to me, I felt like there was no structure here. There wasn't really likable characters. And honestly, I found this one was really hard to kind of get through. I felt like I couldn't connect to these characters, and this one is it's a 1 out of 5 for me. All right, welcome back to Abyss Gazing. We are winding down on coverage for this year's Fantasia Fest, but the last 4 movies I've got here, I only have one of them, so I get to shut up for a little bit. Cool.
Wow.
Mark, you're up now with The Old Man and the Demon-Sword.
So, Old Man and the Demon-Sword. Old Man and the Demon-Sword was kind of cool. It was a shorter movie. It was like 60 minutes, something like that. So it was longer than a short, but it wasn't quite full feature length. Old man meets a monk in the woods, fighting some demons, ends up taking possession of a demon-possessed sword, as the name implies, to go on to try to save his cursed village. The cool thing is that the movie plays out and it's nothing like what it appears to be. It's one of those you get to the end to find out what's really going on, and it's kind of sad, but it plays out. Really fun too. It's kind of a mix of emotions in the movie. When you find out what the twist is, it's kind of like, oh, that's kind of sad. But it was fun. It was cool. It was, you could tell it's very low budget. Like, I'm pretty sure some of the masks would have come from like Spirit Halloween. But the way the movie was done, it all worked for it. It worked in its favor. And my wife, she watched it while with me, and she really enjoyed it too. We both kind of liked it. It was pretty cool.
Yeah,
Pretty cool.
I'm looking it up now. It looks like a crazy time. Honestly, I thought this would be like anime, but it kind of looks like
it's got an anime story to it.
It looks like budget-wise it hits on like the same length as like Sharknado or like Velocipaster.
Yeah, it kind of does. It kind of does, but it's still a fun movie. It has a pretty decent kind of twist ending to it that you kind of didn't see coming.
All right, what's your rating?
4 out of 5.
All right, I think I might be your highest one.
It was pretty good.
We got a positive one from Mark.
He's growing up so fast.
Cheers. So it looks like I got the next one, and this is one that I saw the previews for that I kind of got interested and excited about because it's called Self Driver. Basically, it's an Uber driver that's trying to make extra cash, and all of a sudden there's a new app for the underbelly of the city. So it's do you give up your soul for the money, basically, kind of deal to it. This movie, it was actually great to me from start to finish. I liked it. The storyline paced just right. It has you questioning, would I do this? Would I not? And you know, let's see. I'm trying to look at my notes to remember. You've done it too.
You took notes
of everything. I'm learning from Josh.
What are these notes you speak of?
We covered a lot more movies than you did, Mark.
Yeah, whatever.
Yes. So this movie does hit on a lot of, like I said, I wasn't joking, underbelly, like drug trafficking, desperation, kidnapping, things like that. So it can hit on a lot of mental health or things that affect other people. I actually gave this one a 4 also. And, it kind of fits in the world today. And that's why it hits so well, because of Uber and what people will do for money.
All right. Mark, you're up with our second to last feature.
The Silent Planet.
Yes,
I
sir.
believe this was the world premiere too of The Silent Planet.
Yes.
Which was cool. It's not often we get to see the world premieres of movies, but when we get the chance, it's kind of cool. And one of the reasons I picked this one was because of Elias, what's his name? Cotes, however you pronounce his last name. Because I remember him from movies like being Casey Jones in the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies, and the lead in The Prophecy with Christopher Walken, which we need to cover that sometime because it's awesome. He's the last prisoner on basically a prisoner planet, on a prison colony, and is learning to deal with a new inmate that shows up after he's been there for a very long time by himself. So the concept reminded me, the whole prison thing kind of reminded me something of like No Return from the 90s, and the idea of what they were trying to do. I wish they leaned a little bit more into conflict and action into the movie. To me, it was a lot of conversation, a lot of talking, but they did get into some cool stuff dealing, or he's been by himself for so long, and they talk about like alien fog that causes memory issues and things like that, and it plays into the story, which it plays into not everything is always what it appears to be. And it was an interesting choice in the movie and the way they play out the story. And when you find out everything, it comes down to it almost turns into a redemption story.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What's your rating?
3.5 out of 5.
All right.
So it's a touch slow. It is a touch slow, but it's a good movie overall.
And I will close us out with another world premiere. Also, I got to interview the cast
for this one.
and director for this one. I had the coveted privilege to check out Chuck Russell's Witchboard, but also you guys can go check out my interview with Chuck Russell, as well as cast members Madison Eastman, Charlie Tahan, and Aaron Dominguez over on our YouTube page. That was a great time. One of the most surreal moments that I've ever had. But this is this tells the story of an ancient witchboard that shows up on the doorstep of a blossoming restaurant only days before their big opening. And I'm gonna say it's okay. I had never seen the 3 witchboards from the original 80s and 90s. Prior to this film, I went back and watched them before I watched this film and found that I really loved the first two films, hated the third film. But ultimately what I found was that those first two are very strong films. I would argue that they're way better than a lot of the more modern Ouija board movies that we get nowadays. And this one, honestly, I felt like it had mixed results. Like there were things about it that I really loved, things about it that I really hated. It I feel like in one part, while it does flesh out a lot of the mythos, this is the longest witchboard that we've gotten to date. It doesn't. It does flesh out the mythology a lot of this, and I thought that was really well done. I think that the cast has great things, but there's a lot of subplots within this movie that really seem to only exist to essentially strengthen the runtime and just create awkward pacing. So there's a lot of these subplots that go nowhere, have no payoff, and ultimately, if you remove them from the film, it would make the film that much better. So this film probably runs over maybe 20 to 25 minutes more than it needs to. This film's almost 2 hours, and it could be perfectly fine with an 85 to 90-minute overall. I thought this movie was fine. It's a 3 out of 5 for me. So kind of feels like it's in the realm of most horror remakes.
I know there was somebody in this one that I think you were like super excited you got to interview.
Chuck Russell.
Chuck Russell.
The Mask. Nightmare on Elm Street 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the dude has like a pedigree of The Blob, Scorpion King, Eraser, like Bless the Child. Like, I mean, the dude's made some like really gnarly films.
Oh yeah. I'm not saying he didn't. I just couldn't remember who it was you were so excited to get to interview from this.
What? All right, so that concludes us. But what is the one movie that you would recommend from people to check out this year from Fantasia films that you got to see?
All right, I'll start it out then. I'll stick with Self Driver. If you want something that's kind of new age, towards like what you deal with daily with apps and everything, that's a good movie to go watch.
Probably go with it might be hard to find Old-Man and the Demon-Sword. That would be a good one, or probably Hellhole, because I think it's one of their better entries into their series.
Hellhole's actually coming to Shudder in a few weeks, so you guys can be on the lookout for that. But I will go ahead and say my pick is going to be Dark Match. Dark Match was by far the best film I saw this year, and the film that I thought it was so freaking good. Like, I can't even have words. It's so freaking good. But
are there any movies you're looking forward to seeing that you couldn't see?
That's a great question.
For whatever reason.
I know yours is Witchboard.
I actually had a couple. I wanted to see. I really wanted to see the new Count of Monte Cristo. It actually ended up, I think, winning Best Picture.
It did.
Of the festival.
Yep.
And Shelby Oaks was another one I really wanted to see.
Yeah, Shelby Oaks is up there with me. Was one that I really wanted to see, that I was kind of sad I didn't get to see. One that I really wanted to see, I'm like looking it up right now. So Billy, if you got any, go for it.
No, Dark Match was my big one. I was kind of interested in seeing Wake Up, but I didn't get my hands on that one in time.
So one that I really wanted to see was a film called Rita, and it's this just reading this off a letterbox. Rita, a 13-year-old girl, runs away from her abusive father to the big city. She finds solace until she is placed in a safe house run by the state. Rita and her cellmates plot an escape that ends in shockingly acts of violence. And that was one that I didn't get. I was really bummed by that. But yeah, that and Shelby Oaks is one that I really want to see. I've heard some pretty good things about Shelby Oaks.
Yeah, Soul Eater was another one I wanted to see. That one looked really cool, and it's the whole mountain small village aspect of it. Violent and gruesome deaths start plaguing a small village. An old legend about a malevolent creature resurfaces. Yeah.
So maybe the films that we didn't get a chance to cover this year will be coming to future Abyss Gazing episodes. But that is going to do it for us on this episode. Where can people find you online? Billy.
You can find me on Letterboxd at VABoy99.
I was trying to find you on Letterboxd and couldn't find you because
I'm friends with him.
You're on Letterboxd still? I thought you gave up on that account.
I mean, I've got it. I didn't say I use
it. He doesn't use Instagram either, so
I do too. I just posted my competition piece that I'm working on, and it's actually kind of a big deal. I've got like another week and a half, I think, to get that piece done because it's a big deal for Corvus Belli. It's a worldwide competition they're doing. They've actually, so it's one of the games I paint a lot of stuff for, and I actually play the game. It's by a company called Corvus Belli. It's called Affinity. They just released a big trailer at San Diego Comic-Con and did a big push there. The guys they're working with on the series, the animation series that they're doing, have worked with Marvel and DC and Zack Snyder. And the trailers look fantastic so far. Even if you don't know the lore of the game, it still looks really good.
Nice.
And as part of the big push, they putting out a new rule set here in a couple months, an updated revised rule set, and they're doing a massive worldwide competition, and I have to enter the professional category.
Oh no, Mark, you got to enter the professional category.
One of the guys that taught me to paint and has been teaching me to paint is one of my competitors.
Bum, bum, bum.
Yeah. So that's going to be fun. But I just posted that where I got that primed. I started painting it and I didn't like the direction it was going. So it's getting reprimed and I have about a week to get it done now, looking at the date to get it in by the deadline. But it's I mean, it's not like entering a golden demon, but it's still a pretty big competition they're doing.
Well, you now have all the Fantasia movies dealt with. Now you've got time.
Yeah. There you
go. So that's Titanium Juggernaut Painting on Instagram.
Well, you guys can...
Part of that is I am required to post work in progress pictures and a bunch of completed pictures too. Or my entry is invalid.
You can you guys can find me. I am on Letterboxd also. That is Captain Nostalgia. You guys can follow Abyss Gazing wherever you guys get your podcast from, and also follow our parent company Victims and Villains. We are on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, wherever you guys get your podcast from, and Patreon, where you guys can support us on a monthly basis to help contribute and further our mental health education efforts. It's patreon.com/victims and villains. All of those links are going to be in the show notes below. But now the Fantasia Fest is over. We're going to be heading back to the world of Alien. On the next episode, we're going to be talking about Alien Resurrection, so you can find out if Mark and I see eye to eye or not. So until next time, remember, the longer that you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back into you.